The modern attack surface is vast and permeable, extending from the data center to the cloud and device edge. Security teams are stretched thinner and thinner as they try to cover this ground. The result? More high-profile breaches hit the news every day. Don't let your organization be next. ExtraHop delivers security from the inside out, helping enterprise security teams detect threats up to 95% faster and cut staff time to resolve by 2/3 or more. Act with confidence. Learn more at extrahop.com/securityweekly. Let the team at Black Hills Information Security test your defenses. With over 10 years of experience in penetration testing, red teaming, and threat hunting, the testers at Black Hills will help you find the holes in your security before the bad guys do. The team at Black Hills cares about educating and sharing their knowledge by creating countless blogs, open source tools, and webcasts for you to learn more about the tradecraft of pen testing and red teaming. Visit securityweekly.com/BHIS to join their mailing list and view the latest blogs and webcasts from Black Hills Information Security. Keep your company and products relevant, competitive, and reliable by standardizing your security framework to protect intellectual property, become a reliable business partner, and guard financial and customer information. Standards Connect is an online standards management solution from ANSI. It's Standards Access Simplified. Standards Connect is a cost-saving, fully customizable solution for entrepreneurs and companies that spend $2,000 or more per year on standards and want to translate spend into a subscription model, want to simplify access, search, monitoring, and collaboration, or need a centralized hub of standards for multiple users at one or more locations. Get a free trial at securityweekly.com/ANSI. That's /ANSI.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Paul Asadorian and Jason Albuquerque. Grasshoppers. Security Weekly. Sorry, I had to do that. Security Weekly will be at Hacker Halted in Atlanta, Georgia this October 10th and 11th. EC Council is offering our listeners a $100 discount to attend the two-day conference. Use discount code HH19SW when you register or go to securityweekly.com/Hacker Halted and register there. Make sure you check out the keynote from Mr. Paul Asadorian and Mr. Jeff Mann's talk as well. We have exciting news about the Security Weekly webcast program. We are now partnered with ISC Squared and it is an official CPE provider. If you attend any of our webcasts, you will be receiving 1 CPE credit per webcast. Register for our upcoming webcast with Signal Sciences by going to securityweekly.com/webcast. Also, if you've missed any of our previously recorded webcasts, you can find them on our on-demand library at securityweekly.com/on-demand. And you can earn your CPE credits there as well. All right, gentlemen, let's dig into some articles. All right, so the first one is the second part series that we talked about last week. There's a 5-part series around trust. Last week, we talked the first article. This is the second article in this series. And this one is talking about leading with trust. And the stat that I got out of this, which I thought was very, very interesting, in 2018, more CISOs were fired for ethical lapses than for poor financials or over battles with their board. That's telling to me. If you think about the CEO and the leadership of the organization, is ethics is getting more CEOs fired than anything else.
No, absolutely. I mean, one of the comments was, people evaluate a leader's trustworthiness on the same dimension as they evaluate the company. So if you're heading that company, that's the brand, right? And if you're a leader of that company and you're not viewed as someone who has that level of trustworthiness, you're putting that on the brand of the company now.
Exactly. And they talk about these dimensions of a leader and kind of the different categories.
Yep.
And in the first one, which I think is really interesting, is legitimacy.
I know.
Right?
I know.
Are you legit? Did you get into the position legitimately? That's a big part of trust is, are you a legitimate leader, and did you go through the courses to get to that position instead of just being handed that position?
Did you earn your stripes?
Exactly, because that's viewed very differently on the trust scale.
Agreed. Yeah, and I mean there are these two polar opposite stories within the article as well about legitimacy, right? It was one CEO who kind of worked their way up through the ranks and really worked hard, and by the time it was time to get hired by the board, the legitimacy was there. I mean they earned their stripes in the organization.
What was that dating site with the finger, the hush thing? What was that?
Ashley Madison.
Ashley Madison. Yeah. I feel like that CEO contributed to the downfall of that. Like, he didn't help at all. I don't remember the specifics, but I feel like that kind of played into a really bad example of how to represent your company or not to represent your company.
Yeah.
Right. Because when controversy happens, I feel like the leader is put in the spotlight, and any kind of shady things, Elon Musk falls in the spotlight, and anything that's been about his character that could be negative starts to come to light, right? So bad. I'm not saying either company. Well, maybe I should not Tesla's bad, right? But we've read things about how they do business and how Elon Musk runs the company, and it may call into question the trust that you have with that brand, right? Those are some.
And it ties in.
I hate to
the
bring up
other
negative
dimensions.
examples, but those are negative examples, right?
But I think they help, right? Because they help tell the story. Competences is the second one that's in this list. If you're not competent, and maybe sometimes some of these CEOs aren't competent, that damages trust to not only you as a CEO, but to the company. Motive. I think motive is a huge one, right? You either have to decide whether you're going to run an ethical company and be ethical along that way, and show the motive behind that, or that also impacts your ability to trust.
Never disrespect the Wu-Tang.
Never.
That was I forget his name now, of course, but that was the CEO, Martin Shkreli, right? Thank you, Johnny. Did the whole the shots if you get stung by a bee.
Oh yeah,
EpiPens, right? And he was, but then it was found that he was price gouging, I think HIV or AIDS, AIDS medication as well, right? So.
Right.
So like clearly now the picture's painted that the motive was profit, right?
Exactly.
And that's just never good.
And
I keep bringing these negative examples. I think are easier.
Let me tell
to
you,
come
employees, shareholders, customers, they're all going to smell the BS meter, right? They're going to know right away if you're doing this for selfish reasons or selfless reasons. They're going to smell it right away.
Yep.
And in those situations, the chickens came home to roost.
Law enforcement smelled it too, right? Didn't he?
Absolutely.
He's convicted, right?
I think so.
The other two in here is means. Do you have the means as a CEO to be successful? And then what is your impact as a leader? Both also very important parts here. Because if you don't have the means and the ability to make an impact, that's also going to impact your trustworthiness. And
one of the things I pulled out of the article, too, is that none of these by themselves are good enough.
No.
You have to have the combination.
And you have to have impact on a lot of things.
And ultimately, impact is what you're going to be judged on. That's your success right there, right?
But impact in several different areas. I mean,
impact can be positive or negative.
And it could be positive or negative, sure. But if you look at Steve Jobs, right, I mean, his vision made a tremendous impact, not just on the company, but I mean, on technology as a whole. But then you start scoring him in some of these other areas, right? I mean, we've all read in all the accounts from people in his history. I mean, he wasn't always the best person to work for necessarily, right? But his impact in technology and vision was historical, put it that way.
Yeah. Our second article ties into our last segment. I try to bring these things in because I think they're important. Portrait of a CISO, roles and responsibilities. And this talks a lot about the expanding role of the CISO with the evolution of the threat change and expansion. It talks about the regulatory shift as well with privacy coming into the mix. Todd specifically talked about this. And what's that impact on the role of the CISO? And then we talked again about good communication skills, right? They kind of highlight these three things. We just went through the last segment on with Todd as some highlights of what does it take to be a CISO and what are you getting yourself into here?
Yeah, that's one thing that the book, The CISO Compass, went through a lot of what's in this article, right?
I think key points here. What's important too is that the CISO role, I think Todd said something along the lines of like, we can't be hindrance to technology. We have to be part of the growth, right? And the role really has to allow the company to grow with as little risk as possible, not zero.
And it's not just technology; it's the rest of the business units too.
Oh yeah, growth in all areas.
We can't be a hindrance to HR or to finance, or because it may not be technology; it may be a process that we're changing. It may be a policy that we're influencing, right? It may be those type of business decisions that we have an influence on. So it's not just focused on the technology piece; it's the rest of the business.
Yeah, and Todd said this is that the role is shifting to a business leadership role. It's not a technology role anymore. We kind of came out of technology, right? We kind of came out of as an offshoot of IT to protect all these IT systems, but the role of the CISO is evolving into a business leader who understands that correlation to the different businesses and how to look at risk and understand risk and move things forward, but minimize risk along the way. And it's not just a technology decision anymore.
No, I mean, now it's a privacy decision, a legal decision, right? I mean, we're having these higher level conversations on what types of risk can be introduced to the organization. And at the end of the day, we're playing an advisory role because our board may say, we're willing to accept that risk, right? Based on the feedback and the information and the data we bring to them.
Definitely.
Another piece was communication too. We talked about it in the last segment, right? How important communication is, right? As a CISO, you can't be relaying this highly technical information to the rest of the business units within the organization. I mean, you're going to be talking them in circles, right? So you have to have these communication skills that allow you to take the technical information that you bring to the table, but align it to the business conversation.
Yeah, I also think an aspect of that is being prepared too with the right information. I think a lot of times CISOs and us in security, right, we get blindsided and we just aren't prepared for that conversation. But being prepared for all of that, I think, is key. My brother was actually talking about, he was reading Chris Kyle's book, right? Yep. And what made Chris the best sniper, he admits, he's like, I wasn't the best shot, but Chris spent more time.
Most homework.
He did his most homework, right? And I feel like in this role, right, you're going to be in meetings, in situations, and like you got to do your homework. When you have to explain risk in the context that we're talking about, you have to have done your homework. You have to have some sample data. I feel like what's hurt us in security, and I've fallen victim to this, is going, I think that's a terrible idea and it's going to incur a lot of risk. You have to be able to qualify that, quantify it, and really explain that to folks in a very succinct and non-technical way.
That's right.
And being prepared for those situations, I think, is going to help.
Yeah, one of the pillars of my organization is I tell my managers, always bring your A game. When you're walking in the door, you're walking to a meeting, you're walking to the table, have your A game on. You have to, because you don't want to be blindsided by something. You want to have the right information ready, or at least be able to communicate the fact that I may not know at the second, but I am going to connect you to the people who can give you the answers that you need.
Because as Matt said, a lot of us have a technical background that are in this role. And technically, and from a technology standpoint, like, if we're not prepared, like I can go read and draw on my previous experiences and we can work our way through. I mean, we do this in technology every day, right? We work our way through it. But when you're in those meetings and it's not computers you're dealing with, right? It's people, it's processes, it's procedure and compliance. You have to do more of your homework, I think.
And perception can become reality. And if the way you communicate, you're being perceived as a roadblock, that's what the brand of security becomes, right? And that's not what you want to happen. So, I think almost a level of customer service type communication within the security team is very important, right? Because having that customer service type conversation brings it to a level of, I'm here to service the organization. Right. I'm here to provide a service to you, Mr. CFO or Mrs. CFO, right? And they see you as a partner at that point.
Yes.
You may not always have the answers, but you're seen and perceived as a partner.
Yeah, because you can't be deceived as dismissive.
That's right.
And it's very easy to do that when someone says to you, like, well, we're going to share files over clear text FTP, and that's how we're going to do things from now on, right? It's very difficult as a CISO to not be dismissive of those ideas when you understand, in your mind, the risk of all that. And that very well could be, I mean, when we covered the article on FTP vulnerability, and they talked about open source projects that are using that technology to deploy files and create mirrors. Maybe that's part of your technology. You got to do your homework and understand
That's the key, right? And it's much like that pilot conversation that we had in the last segment. We literally could look at that business unit leader and say, that's not the way it works, sorry.
Yeah.
Or we can explain as to why and what risk it brings and how it's going to affect the business, how it's going to affect our employees and our customers, right? And have that intellectual conversation in a calm fashion and in part to educate.
Right.
On the same vein, right?
Because there's key phrases like clear text FTP that can make our blood boil.
Oh,
I mean, I get it, right? But I think you got to learn to, like Jason said, how to deal with that and communicate effectively with
100%.
This leads into this next article around some of the key skills for leadership. Again, as we think about the CISO role, the CISO is a leader, wants to be a business leader. What are some of those core leadership skills they should have? So this article walks through some of the leadership skills you should get in training. Look, I think if you read this article, you have a pretty good idea of some of the things you need to be focused on, whether you take the training or actually not in this particular case. But starts with core leadership practices, right? Being a role model, making an impact, being collaborative, being positive, some of the things we just talked about.
Sure.
But it gets into some really interesting things like identify your leadership style. It's a really interesting one for some of us to think about. What is our leadership style? Are we autocratic leaders? Are we delegative? Are we participative? Right? There's different types of leadership styles. And I think it helps leaders to understand kind of what is their primary style, because then you can understand some of the challenges or some of the things you're going to have to address based on those styles.
Each one of those styles, it says in the article, and it says it really well, each one has an advantage and a disadvantage. And knowing what the disadvantages are, now you can kind of fill those gaps in other ways, right? Knowing your leadership style. I think But
I think it's too broad, Jason. I think, and it's good that they talk about the different leadership styles, but one thing that I think is missing from this article is knowing when to apply the right style. Of course, we could make the martial arts, kind of analogy, but that aside, as we've talked about on the show before, you're going to be managing different types of people. Everyone is different.
Sure.
If you've got, in the article does a nice job of describing some of the leadership styles, what it lacks is how do you apply those to the situation, to the specific group of people or person that you're leading, right? Because as we've said on the show before, some people respond better to different types of management 100%. Or worse to different types of management.
But I think every person kind of has that core, and they're learning from there, right? So I think everybody has that kind of home base. Are you autocratic? Are you delegative? Or participative is kind of a combo of both. So you can chameleon in and out of both.
Right.
I looked at this and I considered myself kind of that chameleon where I can jump in and jump out of different things. But if you can identify which one of the other two you might be, then you can start focusing on strengthening the other side so you can better balance those conversations, right?
But sometimes you got to be autocratic, sometimes you got to be delegative,
100%.
Sometimes you got to be
100%
right.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's why
somebody
Exactly. And that's probably why some people need the actual training. But that's why some of these other skills come in here, like how to delegate or when to delegate, right? Because maybe you're not a delegator, because you're not a delegative leader, but you have to. How do you motivate a team, especially under an autocratic kind of leadership role, right? Because sometimes that requires you to do a better job motivating a team. So some of these other skills that they talk about in this article, I think are really good. To Paul's point is you have to understand when to apply them, when not. And then some of these other skills come in to help you really round out your leadership capabilities.
And knowing your team, right?
Yes,
what motivates them.
Absolutely.
Knowing the different things that you can do as a leader to motivate your team, right?
Right. And the other thing, and Jason, this will resonate with you especially, Matt, I don't know if you've read the book Extreme Ownership, right? That they don't talk about ownership enough, or even at all, from what I've gathered from this article so far. It's helped me, and it's an awesome book. Jocko, Extreme Ownership, right? Navy SEALs, and there's tons of books written by Navy SEALs out there. This one's absolutely worth it. We've talked about it on the show, right?
The best.
And what you gather out of this is, like, if I'm the leader, whatever happens, it's on me.
The buck stops here.
I own it. If someone makes a mistake, if someone doesn't make a mistake, like whatever the outcome is, you own that as a leader. And whenever anything happens, you got to figure out what you can do better as a leader, so that you do more of what is positive and less of what is negative. That's helped me out tremendously. To just I don't get upset anymore. Like, if something happens, I'm like, you know what? It's on me.
I can own it.
It's work to fix it. I'm going to own it, and let's fix it. And that is probably, in terms of leadership training, one of the best aspects of it that you can bring into your own leadership style.
Agreed. Yeah, a couple of the other ones that I think are important here: managing conflict. We're all going to run into it. I think this is the hardest one for some of us to deal with. Right? Yeah. Is how to manage that. When there is conflict and how to resolve it. The other one that also came out
on that point, and I don't remember the resources we've talked about before on managing conflict, but what I remember from it is probably the most important thing. What you still remember today, the takeaways is you confront it.
You have to.
The worst 100%. Thing you can do is ignore it
and let it fester.
For all parties involved.
That's right.
Like, bring the right people in the room, confront it, get it out in the open, and even before that, something that helps in preparation for that is to build a culture that is supportive of that. That when there is conflict,
that allows for that.
Yeah, that allows for that.
Break,
let's talk about it. Like,
that's right.
It's not going to get better unless you talk about it.
Yeah, the 2 points. Yeah, the techniques here: confront the problem, collaborate to try to find a solution to the problem.
Yep.
Talks about all these in here, which you need to do. You're right. You can't ignore it. You've got to resolve it. You got to be collaborative on how you resolve it and move forward. That ties into the second one, which is always a fun one for leaders, which is performance management and evaluating your employees and their goals for the next year and how to address issues around compensation and career path and all that other fun stuff. I think a lot of us also struggle with that one a bit too.
Along the same lines, and I don't know if any of you have had this experience before, but if you have a leader who just tries to make everyone happy and says yes. And the problem when you do that is that your relationship with that person could be fantastic, right? You want everyone to get along with you as the manager or the leader in your organization. But the problem is they're going to be conflict with the other and tension between the other members of your team if you're saying yes to everyone and it's in conflict with someone else's goals, achievements, whatever the case may be, right? So you have to be, as a leader, willing to know when to say no, right? And don't just tell people yes people to death just to keep them happy.
Right.
That's a thing I've seen people do in the past, and I get it. It's part of their personality, right? They want everyone to be happy, and I get that, right? But that's not the right way to go about that.
But that ties into the previous article that we talked about. It starts eroding your legitimacy.
Right.
It starts eroding your motives as to why you're doing things. Are you doing things just to appease everyone?
Right.
Make everyone happy, or doing things to make a better organization, a better security team, a better company, right? Better services for your clients. So, that's once you start doing that, you start eroding all those other leadership traits that you need.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And we just did this process. Security Weekly went through its annual review process last week, and we just went through this, right? Because I think it's important for us to do that and really understand, where do our employees sit, how they evaluate themselves, where do we see growth and goals and objectives, and how does that align to where we want to drive the business. We just went through that process last week, Paul.
I would
my
say
review is easy recently. It's just write code fast.
Write code fast.
Get
my website out.
One of the best things that I did growing up through the leadership ranks was partnering with our HR folks to kind of learn best practices around these, right? And obviously build my own style and really build my own delivery mechanisms. But by partnering with the other business units who they do this on a daily basis, they write the book for it for your organization, really partner with them and get advice, right? On ways to best handle these type of things. Some of it's your own personality, but there are some best practices, some HR best practices that you're going to want to implement as you're doing these things.
Yep,
agreed. This next article, I want your take on this one, Jason, because what boards can do to prepare for crises.
Yeah.
According to a recent survey, almost half of respondents reported their focus on known risks was a barrier to understanding and preparing for threats that are hard or impossible to predict, and that another 20% felt confident that management could not handle such risks, which I thought was an interesting stat. Right. And then the article goes in and talks about the Cobra Framework. And I didn't know if you were familiar with this framework or not, but I thought it was an interesting approach.
It is very interesting. I was not familiar with it. I definitely used my Google Foo to learn a little bit more about it. And I think it's an interesting approach on how they went at it. They almost went at it almost like a tactical SWAT team going at it, right? They designate commanders and tactical commanders, and
what they did is they split the management team into strategic, tactical, and operational roles separately from the board, which the board was called the Cobra team because of where they met. It's a UK thing.
That's right.
But what they did is they separated the two, created liaisons to communicate between, so that you had the communication, but you didn't have the board stepping into the crisis itself, but staying updated. You had the right management assigned to deal with the crisis, but keeping the board updated. And I thought that was a really interesting approach to deal with the two kind of differences between the management team and the board.
Yeah. It reminded me a lot of emergency operations centers.
It's a PageReddit incident response too, which is the same exact thing
as an EOC, right?
You have to define who's communicating with whom, how are they communicating, and what they will communicate, right? And liaisons are certainly part of an incident response strategy, right? Because let's say you've got 4 different groups in your organization, each of which have dozens of people, and they're all collecting pieces of the puzzle, responding to an incident, let's say, right? That has to get funneled up to multiple audiences, right? That should get funneled up. I mean, legal should be part of your team, but legal needs a report, a summary of what's going on, so they know if they need to respond and how they need to respond. And the board also, senior management and the board, respectively, need to be updated as well. And typically in incident response, you would do that through a liaison. What happened in early days in university when we were having all those security incidents, it had no processes or incident response process because largely there wasn't that much volume of alerts. But when there was, and at first it was chaos because people were then telling the board different things because they only had a piece, of the puzzle. And so this is I think based on that, this is a great framework, having lived through some of that and, kind of tightening up. Okay, the manager of the networking division, right, which let's say at that time had all of networking and all of security reporting up to them, they would report their piece to the board in an email, right? And then sysadmins and desktop people, they designated one person, and that was the liaison to the board. So you funnel your information through certain people. It's a great strategy. It works.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting approach. We are going to talk, I think, in a few weeks about some board stuff. I thought this was a good kind of precursor article to that discussion we'll have in a few weeks. Cybersecurity risk. What is reasonable posture and who says so? Again, back to our previous segment with Todd, right? This whole concept of understanding risk and what's reasonable. Article goes into a lot of different frameworks. Many that I'm familiar with from my GRC days. But I thought it was a really good article to start to get into the nuances of what is considered reasonable, who says so, how do you build your program around this concept and leveraging these other frameworks.
Yeah, I mean,
who was the person we interviewed on the risk framework?
Jack Jones.
Yeah, Jack Jones. And what was his first? Was it first?
Fair.
It was fair. I like that one the best so far. That's all your time in here. That interview with Jack and the framework that he created. I don't know if they mentioned that in this article, Matt. But when we talk about risk today, I go back to that interview on Enterprise Security Weekly. I don't know which one it was. Johnny's probably going to come in my headphones and tell me who that was on Enterprise, which episode rather that was on Enterprise Security Weekly. But that was fantastic, and I like the approach. And I asked Jack to what goes into those factors, and in like one sentence he just described risk, and I don't recall a quote, but it's one of those quotable moments that we have in some of our interviews, right? But he said you have to balance the likelihood, right, the impact, and in all these different, not all the different, I mean very specific factors that he outlined in the FAIR framework, I thought that was a really good way to understand risk, and a lot of it does also come from insurance companies too.
Legal definition, right? I mean, this article went into that a little bit about what the court looks at from reasonable, the term reasonable, right?
And
they
insurance
look at
companies
it. They look at
too,
it. It
right?
says a risk utility, right? I mean, that's basically how they look at it.
Yep.
So
and I think this is a challenge for a lot of organizations: is what is considered reasonable. So this article walks through some of the legal basis for it, but it also provides some great resources for frameworks to build a program that holds up in a court of law when the reasonable principle gets applied to it, right? Did you do a reasonable amount of security? Because you're starting to see fines and some other things come out where you did not do reasonable security practices, therefore we're going to fine you for that. Well, if I'm an organization, I better make sure my program is reasonable to avoid some of those fines.
At the end of the day, I think they're looking for negligence, right? Were you negligent in your implementation or lack thereof?
Episode 139 of Enterprise Security Weekly, Jack Jones, he co-authored a book on FAIR titled Measuring and Managing Information Risk, a Fair Approach. I thought it was really good.
Very good. I've known Jack for years. He and I used to stomp around the state of Ohio together. He was down in Columbus at Nationwide Insurance. So that's part of the reason I brought him on. I think I was on vacation when we did that interview.
A great interview, Matt. Good suggestion. Good find.
Yeah, I think some of what I took away from this is that, they mention a bunch of different frameworks, but start somewhere. no action is still an action, and I don't think that's that's not a level of risk you want to bring to your organization. So, whether it's using CIS or NIST or FAIR or whatever the case may be, start somewhere, start making some progress, start working toward that, right? And that way you can continuously mature, and maybe at the end of the day,
we had a heated debate about PCI and how really? In a similar kind of vein on Paul's Security Weekly last day. Oh boy, and Matt was here for that one. It was. Oh yeah. It was heated. It was heated.
I enjoyed that one.
It was good. Though. I love having those conversations.
And we finished a bottle of Maker's 46 during that conversation.
It was a very colorful conversation.
I can only imagine.
This last article, quickly, encryption has reemerged in warrant-proof encryption is causing us some issues. I only brought this in because I think people who listen to this show need to know what's going on in aspects of this debate is what's going on with encryption, kind of what the government's thinking about. There are concerns around end-to-end encryption creating, areas where we can't do security well, even though it protects on the privacy side. I just think it's a really interesting debate that's going to continue to play out.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to bring it in here.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically having government mandated backdoors, right? And I think this is something that Australia did a little while ago, maybe last year or something like that. Didn't they mandate something similar to what?
I think so.
To what Mr. William Barr threw out there the other day about what his view is from the Attorney General's perspective. At the end of the day, I think this is a blessing and a curse. The blessing side of it is now we're starting to have a real policy conversation. Up until this got dropped, I think it was more along the lines of security versus surveillance. Mm-hmm. I think right now this is really security on security, the true policy debate. So I think it's bubbling that conversation up. Obviously, I have my own personal opinions about this. I always lean toward the side of privacy from the individual's perspective, right? I would never want to create that conundrum of government mandated backdoors. I just think it creates a whole slew of issues in business and society, and I mean it just has all these ripple effects, unintended consequences that I don't think we need to go down. And I think Australia is a very good example where now you're starting to see technology companies actually go away, right? I mean it's affecting business and economy now.
Right.
And again, I think this also brings the privacy debate to a national level that I don't think we've had it yet. I mean, California's doing its thing, Europe's done its thing, and we've played around with it, but we've not gotten real serious about it at the national level. This may get a little more serious. So something for us to continue to look out for.
I think it's bigger than California, though. I mean, this is literally warrant-proof encryption type conversation.
Yeah, I agree.
I want to bring in one of our legal experts that we have as part of our extended family here at Security Weekly to have that debate, because I think it really starts getting into when we read cases, right? Yeah. And we read about how they got the warrant, and then it gets thrown out in court. Like, there's so much case law that we can learn from. That I think we can apply to help balance the privacy, with the warrant. And there's examples in the federal government where like that stuff went right out the window. And I'm like, well, like, say what you will about like a judge has to, bless and issue a warrant versus not. Like, there's a lot to the. We could have a whole segment.
And again, it's a slippery slope because some of the conversations that literally made my blood boil that were said was, well, we're just dealing with consumer technologies and consumer communications. We're not dealing with what's protecting our nuclear keys, right? But wait a minute, hold on. Our politicians, our leaders, they're all on those consumer technologies. They're all using their iPhones to email. They're all using all of these to do their business. So that's a very slippery slope. And I think it's a bad way to communicate it. Number one, maybe uneducated way to communicate it, because again, these legislators, our law enforcement, our nuclear power plant folks are using these consumer technologies to do daily business.
Yeah, we'll have to do a segment on that sometime coming up. I'll probably have to be Q4 though, because this show gets
booked. Yeah. But I think it would be a really good topic. I mean, it's something that you could have a lot of heated debate on, honestly.
Agreed. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Next week is Black Hat, so we hope to see you there, or we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Can't wait.
Security Weekly.